And he said, and be careful of considering what your teacher is doing as a mistake or something like that, because he has or she has the expertise that you might not understand. Just like a doctor might treat a patient with heat who's suffering from a fever. So he says the doctor has knowledge that you might not have. وَقَدْ نَبَّهَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى بِقِصَّةِ الْخَضْرِ وَمُوسَى. And Allah pointed this out in the story of Khidr and Musa. What did Al-Khidr say to him? إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعِ مَعِي صَبْرًا. You won't be able to be patient with me. وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَنْ لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. How will you be patient about something you don't really understand? So what did he? ثُمَّ شَرَطَ عَلَيْهِ السُّكُوتُ وَتَسْلِيمُ. فإن اتبعتني فلا تسألني عن شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرا. And so he said, he put on a condition to be quiet and to be resigned. That was his condition. If you want to follow me, don't ask me about what I'm doing until I tell you about it. ثم لم يصبر ولم يزال في مرادته إلى أن كان ذلك سبب فراق ما بينهما. So he wasn't patient and he kept going against him until it ended up that they separated. So in summation, كل متعلم استبق لنفسه رأيا واختيارا وراء اختيار المعلم فاحكم عليه بالإخفاق والخسران. So if you see a student who thinks he knows better than his teacher and chooses his opinion over his, then just consider him already failed. فإن قلت. And if you say, see, he's knowing, he preempts your disagreement with him. فإن قلت فقد قال الله تعالى فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون. But Allah says, ask the people of knowledge. You're telling us not to ask them? And Allah says, ask the people of knowledge if you don't know. فالسؤال مأمور به. That is a question. فالسؤال مأمور به. And so he's saying, and so they say, so the question, we're commanded to ask questions. فعلم, no. أنه كذلك, that's true. ولكن فيما يأذن المعلم في السؤال عنه. But those are the things that the teacher asks. Do you have a question? فإن السؤال عما لم تبلغ رتبتك إلى فهمه مذموم. Because asking a question that you're not ready to get the answer for is blameworthy. Khalil al-Farahidi, right? Al-Khalil al-Farahidi, the great grammarian. He was once in a gathering and a man asked him a question. He looked at the man asked him a question, and then أطرق رأسه مليا. He lowered his for a little bit of time. And the man said, Subhanallah, afhamtu Khalila. This man said, oh, I stumped Khalil, right? Ifham is like, you shut them up. And Khalil raised his head and he said, you know, when I looked at you, I realized that question was over your head, let alone the answer. But given that you ista'jalt, that you hastened, I was attempting to find an appropriate response for you. But because you hastened it, I'll tell you something. There's four types of people. عالم ويدري أنه عالم فتعلموا منه. A scholar who knows he knows, so learn from him. وعالم لا يدري أنه عالم فنبهوه وتعلموا منه. And a scholar who doesn't know he knows, so remind him and then learn from him. Like Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi, for those who know him. You have to remind him that he knows something because he has genuine humility. And who am I? I don't have anything to say. And he really means it. This is the way he looks at himself. So those people, you have to remind them. No, you have responsibility, this and that. And then he said, وَجَاهِلٌ يَدْرِي أَنَّهُ جَاهِلٌ فَهَذَا مُتَعَلِّمٌ فَعَلِّمُوهُ. And an ignorant person who knows he's ignorant, and that's a student, so teach him. وَجَاهِلٌ لَا يَدْرِي أَنَّهُ جَاهِلٌ فَهَذَا he said, هذا like أحمق, it's like a fool. فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. He said, and an ignorant person who doesn't know he's ignorant, this is compounded ignorance, and this is a fool, so avoid him. right? So those are the four people. You know, you have to figure out which one you're in. And they call that jahal murakkab, which is compounded ignorance. So فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ كَذَلِكَ وَلَكِنْ فِيمَا يَأْذَنَ الْمُعَلِّمُ فِي السُّؤَالِ عَنْهُ. So then he says دع سؤال قبل أوانه فالمعلم أعلم بما أنت أهل له وبأوان الكشف. He knows what's appropriate. Imam Malik was once asked a question and he wouldn't answer the man. So the man said, didn't you hear the hadith, whoever withholds an answer that he knows, Allah will give him a bridle of fire on the day of judgment? And Imam Malik looked at him and he said, that's for somebody who can take the answer. But if he withholds it knowing that it's not an appropriate question for the questioner and he can't take the answer, it doesn't apply. And that's the wisdom of somebody who knows. وَاتَّقُوا فِرَاسَةَ الْمُؤْمِنِ فَإِنَّهُ يَنْظُرُ بِنُورِ اللَّهِ. You have to beware of the inner sight of a believer because he looks with the light of God. You know, the believer has firasa. And so sometimes you know, but it's a type of arrogance. And he'll talk about that a little later. He said that Ali radiallahu anhu said, إن من حق العالم لا تكثر عليه بالسؤال. It's the right of a scholar that people don't ask too many questions. ولا تعنته في الجواب. And don't give him a hard time about the answer. ولا تلح عليه إذا كسل. And if he's not, if he appears to be lazy about something, don't keep ilhah. Like ilhah is just to be relentless in your asking. وَلَا تَأْخُذَ بِثَوْبِهِ إِذَا نَهَض. Don't grab his robe if he's getting up. Like, hey, hold on. وَلَا تُفْشِيَ لَهُ سِرًّا. Don't spread some secret that you might know about him. وَلَا تَغْتَابَنَّ عِنْدَهُ أَحَدًا. Don't backbite in front of him. وَلَا تَطُبَنَّ عَثْرَتُهُ. Don't look for his faults, because trust me, any teacher has faults. If you look for them, you're going to find them. It's a blessing that Allah veils you from the faults of your teachers. وَيَنْزَلْ قَبِلْتَ مَعْذِرَتُهُ. And if he trips, you accept his excuse. وَعَلَيْكَ أَن تُوَقِّرُهُ وَتُعَظِّمُهُ لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى مَا دَامَ يَحْفَظُ أَمْرَ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى. And you should show him respect, and تُعَظِّمُهُ is really to hold him in high esteem, as long as he's following the amr of Allah. وَلَا تَجْلِسْ أَمَامُهُ. Don't sit in front of him. وَإِن كَانَتْ لَهُ حَاجَةٌ سَبَقْتَ الْقَوْمَ إِلَى خِدْمَتِهِ. And if he has a need, you should try to fulfill the need. So that all goes, and this is, our tradition was a tradition of great respect for teachers. Unfortunately, the teachers aren't at the level of these type of teachers anymore, with rare exception. I mean, I would apply all these things to people like Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, some of the great scholars, Shaykh Abd al-Hayy al-Amrawi, Shaykh Muhammad al-Yaqubi, people of stature, but they're unfortunately quite rare now in our community. والوظيفة الرابعة, the fourth, أن يحترز الخائض في العلم في مبدأ الأمر عن الإصغاء إلى الاختلاف الناس سواء كان من ما خاض فيه من علوم الدنيا أو من علوم الآخرة. That you should avoid at the beginning, at the outset of your affair, to get involved in the differences of opinion. I mean, I once heard somebody, say that they began their studies with fiqh al-khilaf. You should never begin your studies with fiqh al-khilaf. You'll go crazy. I mean, there was a scholar in the early part of Islam. He wrote a book of all the rukhas in the religion, all the licenses, and he took it to the ruler to give to him, look what I did. And he was with one of the ulama, and he showed him the book. He said, burn this book. He says, it's going to destroy the religion. And there's so many khilafat in our tradition. So what he's saying is, don't learn one way. Learn a madhab, learn the mashhur of the madhab, and follow that. There's a reason why they came to these conclusions. I'll tell you something about our religion. This religion is a miracle in the history of religions. And I'm speaking with some knowledge of this. My university training was in comparative religion, and I think I probably know of all the traditions after Islam, I probably know Catholicism the best. But I know the Orthodox tradition reasonably well. And I've studied Hinduism. I don't know Hinduism very well, but I have studied it. I studied Buddhism. I studied Taoism. I studied Native American tradition. I read several books on Native American tradition. I mean, there's a lot of different traditions within them, but books like Black Elk Speaks and other books. And the Jewish tradition also. As far as I can tell, there is no religion in the history of religions that was able to do what our scholars did, not because of themselves, in spite of themselves. I really mean that. They couldn't have done it. لو أنفقت ما في الأرض جميعا ما ألفت بين قلوبهم. If you spent the entire world, all the treasures of the world, you couldn't have united these hearts. But Allah united them. Allah united them. This is the only religion that has an agreed upon book. All the madhabs of this religion agree on the book. Even the deviant schools, there's no difference of opinion on the Quran, none. Tajweed, there's no difference of opinion. I mean, that's a miracle. How do you get the same pronunciation? How is that possible? How do you get 17 points of articulation? How is that possible? How is it possible that we know all the attributes of the letters? How is that possible? You can't get Jews to agree on how Hebrew is pronounced. You can't get Christians to agree on how Greek New Testament is pronounced. I had Greek for 2 years. My New Testament Greek teacher said, we don't know how this letter, we think it sounded like this, maybe it sounded like that. How is it? When you hear an Indonesian Quran reciter or a Moroccan Quran reciter, if they're pronouncing it according to the ahkam of tajweed, complete different ends of the earth, they pronounce it the same way. They might have different way of pronouncing it, the tune, that's not a good word, but the melody, the way that they recite it. The maqam, it would be called the maqam. But no other religion has that. Now, how did they agree on these madhabs? I don't know how they did it. As far as I can tell, it's a miracle. There were no councils. I mean, the Christians had to have they actually bumped people off on these councils. They poisoned people. You read the Christian history. People were poisoned. Like bishops that disagreed with it. They just said, it's for a good cause. It's for the unity of the religion. But they did it. They bumped people off. You had Arianism. You had Malachite Christianity. You had all these competing. They had over 30 Gospels at the Council of Nicaea, which was here in Turkey. Over 30 Gospels. You know how they decided? They put it on a table. And in the morning, they came in, there were only 4 on the table. But who had the key to the room? So they agreed on these 4 Gospels, but there were other Gospels. They had to have councils. They had several councils. The Council, the Chaldean Council, the Council of Nicaea. They had the different creeds, the Alexandrian Creed, right? Became the dominant creed. Why? Because he was more powerful than Arian. Arian almost won the day. They voted about these things. They literally had votes like they do now with the magisterium. Muslims never had any of this. You can't prove anywhere in the history of Islam. They had one council where they got together and said, what madhabs should we accept as valid madhabs? How did they agree on 4 madhabs? And then, how did they agree on the mashhur? If you're a Maliki, you study Ibn al-Qasim. Malik had hundreds of students. Why did they all agree on one student? Tell me, why? How'd they do it? They didn't kill anybody. They didn't kill the followers of Ibn Majishun. They didn't kill the followers of Ibn Wahbin. They didn't kill the followers of Muhammad ibn al-Utbi or Sidi al-Mawaz. Those books are there, Al-Wadiha, Ibn al-Habib, the Mawaziyah, the Utbiyah. You have what are called the Ummahat of the... Why is it the Mudawwana? They didn't have any councils because the isnad was, according to them, that was the strongest isnad. He was the one that spent the most time with Malik. He was the one that Asad ibn al-Furat, who was one of the greatest students of Malik, he looked at his book, and then Sahnun codified it, and then it became taught all over the Muslim world. How is that possible? It's amazing. So now this whole call to get rid of these madhabs, after they were literally the only way to explain them is that God had his direct involvement. That's the only way to explain it. And that you could go, Ibn Battuta, a Maliki, could travel the whole Muslim world. He ended up a qadi in Sri Lanka. I mean, how's that possible? How could you have, before technology, before mass communication, you had everybody was studying the same books? How is that possible? How is it possible that everybody agreed on the Tahawiyah? Tell me, I want to know. How is that possible? No government said you have to follow the Tahawiyah. When they went to Malik, Mansuri said we want to make the Muwatta the official book of Islam. Don't make it the official book of Islam. After the Quran, he said the Sahaba spread out in the Ummah. Don't force. That became the standard. No empire ever forced people. The Ottomans respected the other madhabs. They could have wiped the madhabs out and made Hanafi the only madhab. They could have wiped the aqaid out. Even the Ash'aris that became the dominant aqidah under the Seljuks, they didn't wipe the Athariyin out. They didn't wipe them out. They stayed. They're still here. They still have their asanid. Their books are still taught. It's a miracle of this religion. And so throwing this away, that's what he's saying. Be careful. Learn what before you start questioning these people. Before you start, learn. Because these things were not arrived at fortuitously. There's providential care in the preservation of this religion. There is providential care. The miracle of Arabic grammar is a miracle. The Europeans don't have an English dictionary until the 18th century. There is no dictionary. We don't have a dictionary from Shakespeare's time. The Muslims had dictionaries in the first 100 years. But the words were preserved orally. They went around, this great Al-Asma'i, this is a genius Arab. He spent his entire life going to the Arab tribes. What does this word mean? When you say this, what do you mean by this? And he wrote everything down. It's a miracle. Who inspired them? Who inspired them to do that? To find out, because they wanted to preserve this religion, preserve every meaning of these words. This is an amazing thing. And we should have more himmah to try to learn these things. Really. Look at what they did with their life. They expended their life and energy for the preservation of this knowledge. And here we have it. It's all there. And everybody's playing Nintendo. My God. What an ungrateful lot we are. Really. Unbelievable. And he said, listen to this. If you have a teacher who's teaching you a lot of different opinions, beware of him. Look what he says. فَلْيَحْذَرْ مِنْهُ فَإِنَّ إِضَلَّالَهُ أَكْثَرُ مِنْ إِرْشَادِهِ. His leading you astray is more than his guiding you. He said, and blind people can't lead blind people. And the beginner should avoid all these doubtful matters, just like you avoid somebody who's new in Islam from spending time with disbelievers, because he's new in Islam. So you want to get him out of that company, because they're going to say, oh, why'd you do that? And try to put doubt in his mind until he has a strength. And he said, just like the qawi, somebody who's strong, they can go and talk to disbelievers because they're strong. He said they're encouraged to do that. And he said, just like you don't take somebody who's weak and decrepit and put them in the army and put them in the front lines. The fifth one, he says, is that ألا يدعى طالب العلوم فنا من العلوم المحمودة ولا نوعا من أنواعها إلا وينظر فيه نظرا يطلع به على مقصده وغايته. So this is really what he's saying here, is that he should not leave the student. ألا يدعى طالب العلم. The student should not leave one art from these praiseworthy sciences, ولا نوع من أنواعها, or a species of it, إلا وينظر فيه نظرا يطلع به على مقصده وغايته. He should look at it to understand its point. In other words, you should have a diversified education. It's very important not to focus only on one thing, because specialization is dangerous. You should have a general education. That's what he's saying. It's very important to have a general education. This is what we would call today a liberal arts education. And then he said, and if his life helps him, then he can become more and more knowledgeable about these things. But he should always take the first, most important, and then move on to that. And then he says, وَإِذْ لَمْ يَهْتَدُوا بِهِ فَسَيَقُولُونَ هَذَا إِفْكٌ قَدِيمٌ. That people who are ignorant of something become their enemy. Like Allah says in the Quran, because they weren't guided by it, they said, oh, this is just fairy tales of the old. It's made up stories. فَالْعُلُومَ عَلَى دَرَجَاتِهَا إِمَّا سَارِكَةٌ بِالْعَبْدِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. So all of these knowledges based on their different degrees should take the servant to his Lord and help him in his journey to God. And there are manazil, and these are ordered to get you there. And he said, and learning these knowledges has the same importance for our religion as those guarding the boundaries of the Islamic lands. In other words, just as you defend your country against enemies from outside, you have to also protect the purpose of your civilization, right, from the enemies inside. Nafs, shaitan, hawa, and dunya. And then people that lead other people astray. So he's saying that this is real jihad, to learn these things. والوظيفة السادسة إن العمر إذا كان لا يتسع لجميع العلوم غالبا فالحزم أن يأخذ من كل شيء أحسن. That your life, by its very nature, will not allow you to study all knowledges. Especially today, there's just too many. In these days, it was easier to learn everything that everybody knew of the outward sciences. They say Goethe was the last person that knew everything. But you have a massive explosion of information. I mean, just to learn all we know about the kidney would take a lifetime. Seriously, just to learn all we know about the kidney. And still there's things that are going to be learned in the future about the kidney. So he said you should learn the most important ones. Take the most important ones. And then he said, أشرف العلوم علم الآخرة. The most honored and important of all the sciences is the science of the next life. And it has mu'amala and mukashafa. فَغَايَةَ الْمُعَامَلَةِ الْمُكَاشَفَةِ. The purpose of your transaction, your outward behavior, is an inward spiritual reality. And the غَايَةَ الْمُكَاشَفَةِ, the end and the purpose of this inward reality is to know your Lord. وَلَسْتُ أَعْنِ بِهِ الْاعْتِقَادِ. And I'm not talking about aqidah that you learn from a teacher. And I'm not talking about dialectical theology. I'm not talking about argumentation. These are fine to learn for polemics and to argue against people that are attacking us and obfuscations and these things. I'm talking about certainty. I'm talking about the fruit of light that Allah thrusts in the heart of a believer that's been purified through mujahada, through struggle. He's purified his inward state from all the foulness, and he until he reaches the rank of iman. And we're talking about the iman of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, that if his iman was weighed in the scale, it would outweigh the iman of all the worlds. He said, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about what the Sayyid al-Bashar said. فما عندي أما يعتقد العامي ويرتبه المتكلم الذي لا يزيد على العامي. I'm not talking about learning some list of things that some theologian has put together that's going to tell you what God is and what God isn't. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Umar and Uthman. I'm talking about the rest of the Sahaba. Because they didn't know those lists. The Prophet ﷺ said Abu Bakr's iman was because of a secret that God put in his chest. والعجب ممن يسمع مثل هذه الأقوال من صاحب الشرع صلوات الله عليه وسلامه ثم يزدري ما يسمعه على وفقه ويزعم أنه من ترهات الصوفية. He said, so how bizarre it is when people hear a hadith like that from our messenger and they have contempt for the things that they hear like that and claim these are just from the fabrications of the Sufis. فينبغي أن تتئد في هذا الأمر. Go slowly in this affair. فعنده ضيعت رأس المال, because you can lose the capital, the whole purpose of this. وكن حريصا على معرفة ذلك السر. Be serious about knowing this secret that is not with the fuqaha and the mutakallimin. The jurists don't have it, and the theologians don't have it. And the only thing that's going to get you there is your seriousness in seeking it. فعلى الجملة أشرف العلوم وغايتها معرفة الله عز وجل. The most honorable of all knowledges is the knowledge of God. This is an ocean that you will never get to the bottom of. And these are the extreme ranks of the human being. And the highest of it is the rank of the prophets, and then of the awliya, and then those who come closest to them. And two philosophers were once in a masjid talking, and one of them had something written, and it said, إن أحسنت كل شيء فلا تظنن أنك أحسنت شيئا حتى تعرف الله وتعلم أن مسبب الأسباب وموجد الأشياء وتعلم أنه مسبب الأسباب وموجد الأشياء. Don't think you know anything until you know God, and you know that He causes everything, and He's the one that brought everything into existence. And the other one said, كنت قبل أن أعرف الله أشرب وأذمأ حتى إذا عرفته رويت بلا شرب. Before I knew God, I was thirsty all the time. I drank and I still had thirst. Now that I know God, I no longer have thirst without any drinking. The seventh wazifa, ألا يخوض في فنون العلم دفعة بل يراعي الترتيب فيبدأ بالأهم فالأهم ولا يخوض في فن حتى يستوفي الفن الذي قبله. This is important. My time's up, so I'm going to stop there, because we're going to finish, inshallah. Bidnillah. I'm hoping. Pray. So I'll stop there on the 7th, because that's an important one to know. Will you please repeat the first responsibility of the student? Right? That you have to purify your heart. That should be the reason that you're seeking knowledge, is to purify your heart. How does one know they have become arrogant with their knowledge? There's signs He gives them, and we'll get to that. That's the toughest read for people that teach and things like that. It's also the biggest section, right? The dangers of knowledge. And it's very easy to become arrogant. Intellectual arrogance is very common. Academia, it's rife. I mean, some of the most arrogant people you'll ever meet are PhDs, right? Seriously, it's amazing. Every once in a while you meet somebody extremely humble amongst them, but it's quite rare. Could you please define the kind of argument that Imam Malik disliked? He disliked argument, period. Just argument. The Prophet did not argue. You know, the Quran says, لا تجادل إلا بالتي هي أحسن. Don't have jidal except in the most beautiful way. That's not argumentation. Argumentation, it's not nice. People get angry. Who wrote Siraj al-Muluk? Abu Bakr al-Turtushi, al-Andalusi, and then the Egyptian. I know that when I return to the Rihla, my family and friends will want to know what I learned and teach them. However, even though I have learned a lot while here, I feel even less qualified to want to teach others what I learned or to correct others. What suggestions do you have for that? Inshallah, I'll deal with that later. What is your nasiha for Muslim teachers who are teaching today's youth? Many of these children are unable to reach their potential as they are overwhelmed by technology. Adab is dead. Adab is definitely not, it's really hard to find it. And when you get to the adab that they're talking about, is very subtle. I mean, you know, Imam Nawawi, his teacher used to invite, this is his favorite student, his teacher used to invite him to come eat with him, and he would always beg for an excuse. Just, please, a'dirni. And so the teacher asked one of the other students, find out why he doesn't want to come have dinner with me. And they asked Imam Nawawi, and he said, it would pain me greatly if I took a piece of food that his eye had reached before my hand. Yeah. Allah yarhamuhum. So my nasiha for Muslim teachers who are teaching today's youth, we have to have compassion. These kids are really under an assault of the mind, and we have to have compassion as much as we can, with them. And there is a new generation. Some of you are already from them. Other you are some older people, but the digital generation is very different. I mean, I've been teaching now for over 20 years, and I see a real difference just in the young people. So that's a tough one. If someone wants to pursue Islamic studies, would you recommend them to get married, or is it better to hold off to avoid preoccupations? It depends on if it's traditionally they didn't recommend getting married. Many of the scholars never got married. There's a book Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda wrote on ulama al-uzzab, the bachelor scholars. One of them was Imam Nawawi. He never married. Ibn Taymiyyah never married. So marriage is half the deen, and the Prophet ﷺ, his way is the way of marriage. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, when his wife died, he got married immediately because he said he didn't want to be not practicing the sunnah. And trust me, that's a totally sincere statement from him. Radiallahu anhu. He didn't want to be without a wife because the place of a spouse in Islam is very strong. So it's difficult to study in marriage. It's better to focus. Co-ed education makes it really problematic because and this was a big debate for us at Zaytuna, because people are going to, polarity necessitates. If you spend a lot of time with people of the opposite sex, if you're healthy, you're going to be attracted to certain people. There's chemistry. It's just in human nature. And so people fall in love, and then ishq is a real problem. What they call, this erotic impulse, which min al-ishqi ma yaqtul. The Arabs say there's ishq that kills, and ashiqa ya'shiqu comes from it's the vine that curls around the tree and strangles it to death. So it's interesting. The vine is in the traditional hierarchy of being, it's the highest of all the plants because it has motility, it moves, the vine. That's why you see that motif in a lot of masjids. You'll see the vine motif. It was an honored plant. And so the ishq is that desire. The plant has that desire to go and search for whatever it's searching for, God knows. So what is the best way to gain beneficial knowledge from Western universities where professors are pushing secular, Eurocentric, Orientalist concepts? I'm against going to Western universities for students that have not been, had a pretty solid foundation in Islamic knowledge. I think they're very powerful. I've been through the university system. I did doctoral studies at UC Berkeley, which is, I think, #1 public university. And I had in my university, even at State, when I was at State, I had some really good teachers. I had some very decent people. But there were also some really aggressive secularists that just don't like religion. And because I was in philosophy and religious studies, I was taking philosophy and religious studies courses. And some of them, they're sophists, and critical theory is very dangerous. Like I'm very concerned about the amount of critical theory that has been imbibed by our young people. Because if you go to Western universities, in any of the social sciences, you're dealing with critical theory. It has taken over the university system. It's rooted in Marxism. Marxism is rooted in Greek materialism. Hegelian dialectic and all that. Marx did his PhD on Greek materialism. Greek materialism are all the people Socrates was crushing. So Socrates and Plato, who dealt with materialism very powerfully, they held sway in the West for a few thousand years, but their reign is long over. And today it's the reign of the materialists. They do not believe in a spiritual soul. They don't believe in essential nature. They don't believe that there's an essential female nature, an essential male nature. They believe in the fluidity of the mind and neuroplasticity, that people can float in and out, that we're all really bisexual. We just don't know it. I mean, these are a lot of the beliefs that are the beliefs that you'll find in a lot of these people. I think in Western sciences, in terms of the physics, biological sciences, medical sciences, with the caveat that allopathic medicine is one form of medicine. If you want to read an interesting book about that, you can read about Rockefeller's influence on chemical medicine. I mean, he gave Johns Hopkins over $100 million to basically support allopathic medicine, even though his own physician was a homeopath. There's no money in homeopathic medicine. It's just cheap. But, how did we get this dominant medical model that now reigns supreme all over the world? And it's controlled by pharmaceutical companies. It's not to say there's not a lot of good in it. There is, and I believe that. There's a lot of good in allopathic medicine. But there's a lot of harm in it, and it's not the only model out there. And Chinese medicine has been around for thousands of years. I would argue that it's probably from a prophetic tradition. It certainly has elements that sound very from within that tradition, but it works. I mean, I know that acupuncture and the Chinese herbs, it works. It's effective. And Chinese doctors that are good at practicing it, they see its effectiveness all the time. They see its effectiveness in a lot of diseases. And they can deal with diseases that allopathic medicine can't deal with. They can treat things like asthma, they can treat eczema without suppressing the symptoms. But because there's not a lot of money in herbs, they're called orphan drugs. So you don't get people that study those things. But for medicine, I think there's some use if you keep an open mind. I mean, the single most important thing for health is diet and exercise. And doctors learn very little about diet and exercise. I mean, they don't study nutrition. And we know, I mean, heart disease is reversible. Dean Ornish has seen countless people, complete reversal without needing bypass, without getting rid of all the plaque, just from changing their diet. And then he says, he says that the allopaths tell him, no, that approach is too extreme. It's too extreme to change your diet. You can't expect Americans, these bovine people that can't resist a McDonald's, you can't expect them to change their diet. But it's not extreme to take a saw and literally split their sternum and then with forceps open it up, take their heart out, rip off the veins and take an artery from the leg, right, and sew it onto the heart and then put it back in. That's not extreme. That's a moderate approach to heart disease, whereas changing their diet is extreme. Subhanallah. But you can't make a lot of money by telling people to change their diet. You can make a hell of a lot of money by splitting their sternum open and taking all those veins out of their heart, right? And even the bypass, they know it doesn't extend life. Really. It gets rid of the pain for a little while, but then usually it comes back. It's amazing. So, sorry for all the cardiologists. I have some good friends that are cardiologists and cardiac surgeons and things like that. I was actually a cardiac nurse. So I worked in a cardiac unit. Western universities, in those areas, there's a lot to learn. I believe that. But in the social sciences, it's a disaster. I would not suggest any Muslim person get a degree unless it's a Catholic school, maybe, some of the Catholic universities, in literature, in philosophy, I really would not recommend. Some people, they love literature and then they go study literature at the university, and it's not about literature. It's about philosophy and critical theory and deconstruction and subtext and power politics and Jane Austen and how all the maids and the butlers are invisible people, and the aristocracy are these evildoers and things like that. So there's definitely some truth to that, but it's not the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Anyway, so that's my advice. We need to make our own universities. Wallahi. And that's why we started that, because it's like, why don't we have the Christians have their own university, the Jews have their own university. We invented the university, for God's sake. We invented it. The Muslims invented the university. Read The Rise of Colleges by the Christian scholar. We invented the university. We invented all these, the rigor of academia. We invented academic rigor. There's no academic rigor in the West. We invented this, our tradition. We, I mean the Ummah. Who are we? We haven't done anything, right? We make good baklava, let's face it. Come on. We make good carpets. We still have some good calligraphers. We're good at blowing up things. They used to call people like Saifuddin, the sword of the religion, and Shamsuddin, the son of the religion. We just have to stop doing that. We should call them Mil'aqatuddin, the spoon of the religion, Shawkatuddin, the fork of the religion, because we're great eaters, Yeah, Ramadan, it's like people, they eat more in Ramadan in the Muslim world than any other time of the year. It's amazing. They eat more. They stay up all night eating, watching musalsalat on TV. And why are these shayateen? They put the best TV programs all year long in Ramadan. Why do they do that? Really, why do they do that? Just to make sure you do social control. You don't want people going to the masjid every night and suddenly maybe actually having changes of heart and getting spiritual awakenings, and then suddenly they get spiritual awakening, they start reading the Quran, and then they read all those verses about how things should be, right? And then they look around and see how they are, get angry. And then instead of going and doing the real work, they pick up rocks and throw them at people and stuff. So anyway, my time's up. Long time ago. I apologize. Allah yubarak fikum. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.